Joe, thank you for joining me. And as excited to chat with you, and as I've gone through your book and learned a little bit about you, I love hearing the stories in books. And I think, to me, that's what makes books impactful. And as we were just chatting here, this is the line that, to me, because you said it many times, and to me as a leader, it's the quality that I think is most imperative. So I'm going to say this. In my opinion, being exceptional, so your book, Be Exceptional, being exceptional is really about being empathetic.
I think you nailed it. I think you nailed it squarely on the head. If you ask people, do you want to be average? Nobody wants to be average, right? No hands go up unless the guy was asleep and suddenly he's woken up. But if you ask, who wants to be exceptional? Everybody raises their hand. But then comes the next question. Well, how do you do that?
Mm-hmm.
How do you do that? Because if you're telling me that you're going to work harder, or you're going to spend more time away from home, or you're going to do what? And you nailed it on the head, is this concept of empathy, of being outward rather than inward, of leaving things better than they were. That is really hard for a lot of people. I know you've had, you've come across a lot of Navy SEALs, and these are really special folks. And when you talk to them, they're very humble. Most of the time, they walk around. You wouldn't even know they're Navy SEALs unless, as in my neighborhood, you notice that their legs are not like your legs. And but the philosophy of leaving things of better, of making those key sacrifices for a greater purpose, as the Navy's SEALs say, it's not for everybody. And so when we, I often say in America, this is a great country. If you're average, you're going to get a paycheck. But if you're exceptional, you're going to have influence. And very few people rise to that level. And I think in part it's because they're not taught what those things are that will make you exceptional. Because if it's a car, you could have a dozen cars and maybe they'll disappear the next day. We don't really teach this, how to go that one step further.
So let's tie that back into, I'd love to, as I made the comment, and you backed it up, because this to me is the greatest opportunity in leadership today, and especially generationally, is understanding what true empathy is. Right. And I think that's a challenge, because it's hard to really, I think, in some ways understand, define. And as you did a great job of kind of sharing your story, I want to ask this question: is what do you feel, as I just stated, that is the barrier from people being empathetic? If being exceptional is about being empathetic, and that is the greatest key in leadership, and what do you think holds people back? What's that part of them that holds them back from being empathetic?
That's a fantastic question, and no one else has asked me that, and I'm glad you have. I think in part it's not a simple answer, because in part sometimes it has to do with how rigid we are, how closed off we are. I love it when I'm at a foreign hotel and I hear somebody from the United States and they've traveled for the first time, and they say, "Oh, wow, this is pretty neat," or "Look, this is really cool." It's like, well, what did you expect? And their eyes are open. Nothing opens your eyes like travel. Nothing creates more empathy than travel, of being proximal. So one of them is having that open mind, that receptiveness. Two is and I see this with great leaders. You know, whether you go back to World War II and you saw Eisenhower mingling with the troops right before D-Day, or Alexander the Great, I talk about in the book, going out before a battle and just what we would say today, just hanging out with the boys. Today would be hanging out with the boys and those fearsome women. And getting a feel for, you know, are they up to the challenge and so forth. And I think to be empathetic, you have to be in the thick of it. If you're 1,000 miles away, 500 feet away, 20 feet away with a closed door, you're not going to achieve it. You have to be present. You have to feel it, smell it, touch it, and experience it. And I run into some people that think there need to be these divisions where, well, I'm not going to go down there. What? Me stand in the loading dock and see what that's like? You know? And yet, as one example from this very senior guy in New York, he was taking me about in his building, and he says, I found out more about shipping problems from the people in the loading dock than all my executives. They can tell you who's ticketing, who's taking their time, who comes in late, who's having problems, all this stuff. And you cannot possibly empathize. I think you could argue you cannot empathize if you are not there. I think you can have sympathy. I think you can have understanding. But until, you know, I remember being at a crime scene. It was about 118 degrees in Yuma, Arizona. And
beautiful place.
Yeah. I used to go through a set of tires on my Bureau car every month. It was so, they would just, well, we bought cheap tires. They would just explode. But until you've been at a crime scene like that, you don't understand the life, what these people went through. You really don't understand. How do you testify in court if you can't present that total picture of living in poverty, alcohol abuse, on and on and on? And so I think you have to have that open mind. I think you have to have proximity. But as you know, one of the key things I talk about in the book, Be Exceptional, is you have to be able to observe the needs, the wants, the desires, but more importantly, the fears and concerns of others. A truly empathetic person can sense and feel and understand this person is scared, this person is worried, this person is going through anxiety. And what as a leader can I do? One of the things they don't teach in business school, and I've been to all of them, and I've been to all, but here and in Europe, and the one thing I see over and over, and I ask the instructors, where's the section on the amelioration of fear? And they look at me like, what? That's one of the jobs of a leader, to get rid of obstacles and get rid of anything that would cause fear. Because, as you know, fear can damage you. Fear can leave you trapped. People don't even go out of their house. They live in fear. And yet, that is one of the responsibilities of a leader. You know, we often talk, well, they have to have a mission and a goal and this and that. Really? What about the fear, that apprehension that we all have that this could not work, or maybe this will get in the way, or that? A leader's responsibility is to assess for fear and to diminish that fear. And yet, look at how many people fail to do that today. In fact, there are people now that dedicate themselves to just artificially create fear because it can make them money. It gathers people around them. Yeah. But it accomplishes nothing. Absolutely
It's very
nothing.
short-lived. It's very short-lived, right?
Exactly.
You know, it's kind of like, you know, that firecracker burns fast and hot, but it doesn't sustain. And so it's not going to create this warming fire over time. It's just going to be something quick. And, it brings with all those, different types of metaphors and similes that you could go into.
Yeah. But the great leaders that I've known, they sense when, our SWAT team, we were outnumbered. I remember one time we had to go into, this is the only, it's not in the book, but it's the only time that our SWAT team had to go into a small city, a town in Puerto Rico, and it's the only time that we have had to evacuate from there with helicopters standing by, ambulances standing by, and walking backwards out. That's how dangerous it was. And I remember our SWAT team commander at the time, Larry Likar. And the whole way out, he's checking on us. Are you okay? Are you okay? Mm-hmm. Maintain that calm. That's the job of a leader, to attenuate fear and apprehension. Why? Because we function better.
No, I love it. This is one of the things that I picked up, and again, be exceptional as in your own book. You've read a ton of books and a lot of great information, but yet, to me, to see the desire that you've had to take this interest in human, I don't want to say human function, but human function in the sense of nonverbal communication, right? Sure. That's a functionality. And to me, the cool piece that I saw is when you immigrated to the United States and you were a little boy. Right. And you didn't know any language, and you got thrust into this situation. To me, that's when you started to learn that you had to look at all these nonverbal cues in order to understand your surroundings. To me, that's where the seed was placed, in my opinion. Do you feel like that was the case?
I think you're exactly right. I think, well, interestingly enough, we came here as refugees thinking that we would only be here a few months. We came from Cuba.
Oh, okay.
And I only spoke Spanish. And so we thought, okay, there's a revolution in Cuba. It'll be over soon, and we'll go back. But as a child, you have to rely on something. And the only thing that I found comfort in, and I think you nailed it, is, wow, the body language, it's the same. When Tyler smiles at me, I know what that means. I know when Tyler looks away, I know what that means. And so it was something that as a child, my parents were both working 2 jobs as waiters in Miami Beach. They weren't around. And so I had to latch on to something that gave meaning. And so I became very sensitive to that. And I think my mother would tell you, all the way down to when I was 8 and 9 years old, I always paid attention to the body language more than what people were saying, because inherently I found it more honest. And I think you've seen it in relationships when you walk into a group and you see the person that eagerly seeks you out and says hello, the person that just is overwhelmingly happy to see you, versus the person that just kind of looks over and does one of these things. And I think universally we put more reliance now on words when really it's about the nonverbals. I think the best relationships is based on nonverbals. When you see leaders, when I see Colin Powell take a stage and he has his command presence and he hasn't spoken yet, and you realize this is all about nonverbals. That you can have people really influenced just by your demeanor, by your kindness, by, again, your empathy. These are powerful tools. Powerful.
It's funny as you say that about Cullen, and I've never met him, and I of course admire the guy. But as you're talking about that, I think about, all right, how does he stands very, very composed, not overpowering. He's he will accept what's there. And I'm just thinking of the times that I've seen him in his body language without ever saying a word. And you're right that it gives this presence of, hey, if there's someone I want to lead me, it's him. He's composed in his demeanor shows that I'm not going to try to overpower you. I'm here to be a rock almost, and we're going to get through this together. That's what I feel based upon how he presents himself.
Exactly. When I look at Colin Powell, and I've presented at events where he has been at, or I look at somebody like Mary Erdos of J.P. Morgan, and you realize what these individuals, these leaders, have in common is their gestures are very smooth. They have smooth but broad gestures. And they can afford to do that because they have confidence in themselves. They don't have to be jittery. One of the things that I've often used for teaching is I have two photographs of two individuals, and they're both in military fatigue uniforms. And the only difference, I don't show the face. The only thing is different is one has the little badge of the insignia of a corporal, and the other one has the insignia of a general. And I said, how many of you would be able to notice them if it was just based on their behavior? And their behavior is totally different. It's totally different. Those little insignia are insignificant. When a general walks into a room, you sense it. When a corporal walks into a room, you sense it. Why? Because their nonverbal communication is different. It's different.
At the same point in this discussion, I think if there's a case, and talk about if there's a general that walks in the room that you're like, I'm with that guy, as opposed to a general that walks into the room, it's like, I'm not sure about that guy. It's based upon how they walk in. It's right. It's how they present themselves. And that's in any board. It's not necessarily the military. It's anywhere. It's like how that leader walks in, as you described earlier. Are they walking in looking at people, or are they they're brow furrowed and they're just direct to the point? It's like, I'm not sure I want to follow that guy because is he worried about himself or me?
Yeah, I think you have a point. Most of my business is in the financial sector, and their concerns, and their genuine concerns, are customers, keeping customers, taking care of customers, their clients, making sure that everything from their curbside appeal to their personal appeal is the best that it can be. And you're right. The leader that comes in and engages each and every person, maybe they can't talk to everybody because there's too many, but boy, they sure make that eye contact and they acknowledge each other, and they turn yield and do all these things that when you walk away from that meeting, you say, I want to attend the next meeting. And yet, I've been led by people who it's like, I hope I never have to come to this meeting, another meeting like that with this clown again. Yeah. Because their mind is on themselves. They could care less about what you're going through, but we go back to that first thing you said. It's about empathy, and really, in many ways, that's what the book is about. Is you can only create psychological comfort through empathy. Empathy is you have to be able to observe what is going on in the room. And I think that's why I dedicated so many years to studying nonverbals, and most of my books are on that subject, is if you can't tell your son or your daughter is having issues when they walk through that door, or you can't tell that something's going on in this meeting, that, I sense something isn't right, then you're not properly observing, because it's often just there for you to pick up on.
Well, that chapter in the book to me was very, I think it's powerful in the sense that, and as we're discussing this empathy, which I think is so hard to define in our world, we're not sure, but this idea that I can learn those skills. you shared multiple times in the book about how as a young agent, as a, fresh in the bureau, that you had to learn how to, understand who was a threat, who wasn't, how did they carry themselves, so forth and so on.
Right.
And that was a skill you developed, no different than, how you handle a weapon and everything else. And I think, to me, that's what's really, I think, important to know as a leader. Is once you have a person like you had Agent Moody, or those of us have our spouses, whoever it may be, that says, hey, you don't realize the impact you're having on people because of how you're showing your body language. Right. And for those of you, when you read the book, it's, you can talk about, Agent Moody, Joe.
Yeah.
But I think that's important that we understand, hey, you can learn and develop this stuff. It isn't a God-given talent you either have or don't. You can learn and develop it.
Thank you for pointing that out. The assumption that somehow this is sprinkled on you and you're born that way is such a fallacy. I do think that some children from a young age begin to realize that they have a role. And I think they realize it. I've seen it with children. I saw it today at the YMCA, where a young boy took it upon himself to help the other children who didn't have goggles. And I was astonished. I said, he's doing something no other adult even thought of, scrounging around to help his mates. He's probably 11 years old. He's already showing leadership. But the traits that, for instance, you need for the job of law enforcement, where the public, all of us, the first crime scene I went to was a bank robbery in Phoenix, Arizona. And, you get there, I was 24 years old. I walk in the door, and there were 4 tellers, I believe, and 2 managers, and they're looking at you like, well, you're our salvation. And I was like, God help us all. I'm only 24. And, but you realize they're expecting you to remain cool, calm, and collected, to take charge, to seize the crime scene, to make sure that everybody's separated, to calm them down and explain to them physiologically what they're going through and all that stuff. And as almost every athlete, an elite athlete learns, is you become a role model by looking at those traits that best serve you and others to be that role model, that you have to carry yourself in a certain way. A lot of the coaching that I do, which is one-on-one with executives, involves this, that all of a sudden they've accomplished a lot very quickly, but they don't know. They haven't had those, in the old days, you went to General Electric as a 20-year-old, and 15 years later, now you became an executive and you were mentored. Now we have to create our own mentorship program so that we can begin to use those behaviors. And it's all about behaviors that you can learn, so that you can be more patient, so that you can engage people, so that you can communicate with them. And again, is when we go from being average to exceptional, is what does that take? That need to communicate more effectively, to be able to observe more effectively, and then to be able to act more effectively. Those things, they're just not showered on us. We have to go out and learn how to do it so that we can then measure what is our effect on others. Because in the end, and you know this, Tyler, as Carl Sagan said, all we are is the sum total of our influence on others. That's all. Mm-hmm. That's the only thing that matters. And until we begin to shape that and mold that, we're not at that exceptional level. But as we get closer to that, you begin to see the influence that we have. And influence isn't about walking around with your chest held high and your chin high. It's about the gratitude that people have for being in their lives.
Yeah.
And whoa, how many people can achieve that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's what Jim Collins writes about in Good to Great. It's that, that level 5 leader and that person that does have that tremendous trust and influence and thereby legacy impact. And I think the great lesson that, I've had to learn empathy. And for me, I think it come back and I think back about your experiences as you share that everyone has a catalyst point to where, this is how in my mind, this is going to be the shortest route to get it done. But oftentimes we find going back to that firecracker, it's like, that's only short term. And we don't learn that, hey, you know what, that may get it done today. But is it going to get it done tomorrow and the day after and the day after that? And to me, that's that great executive learning cycle to say, hey, you got here. Great. But guess what? What got you here won't get you there. And let me start to clue you in. If you're going to lead people, man, you need to build rapport with them. You got to connect with them. You got to show that you care about them if you ever want to achieve anything. Because if you don't treat them as people, man, you're not going to be a leader long.
Yeah, you're exactly right. In the book, I write about this wonderful man and his wife, George Logothetis, in New York. And, over the years, he has struggled with, issues and travel is difficult for him. But every year he makes it out to every office around the world. And I go, George, why do you do that? just jump on a Zoom call. And he just shakes his head. And his wife, Nitsia, she says, Joe, you've known my husband 20 plus years. Haven't you learned anything? He wants to be in the same room. He wants to look at him. He wants to hear the stories. He wants to share the coffee. He's not there to look at the books. He can look at the books on his computer. He's there to influence them by his presence. And he builds that into the equation. How many people build that into the equation? For most people, it's an accident. Oh, I was here, so I stopped by to say hello. Yeah. But that's really what makes for an exceptional individual. When I look at Jane Goodall and how she changed our perception of everything just by how she looked on our nearest cousins, apes, and said, look at them as something to be valued, not to be shot, not to be captured. How we look at things, how we engage with them, and then turning to a public which was reticent to accept her philosophy and begin through her own nonverbals how she engages. She has persuaded millions around the world to be more empathetic to the animals around us. She did that one little level at a time. She didn't set out to make this quantum change. But those incremental behaviors, how she looked at the animals, how she talked about them, her refusal, for instance, to number the animals as scientists had done, but to actually give them names, began to change our perceptions and how she tells the story. All of her stories are stories of empathy. Find one book that she has written where it isn't a story of empathy, and you can't find it. They're all about empathetic understanding.
Yeah. Well, I think the great opportunity, and especially as we've gone through the pandemic exposure and how that's changed human interaction, and people are yearning to get back into interaction. But, as companies and businesses understand, hey, how are we going to operate? I think there's great opportunity I've learned a lesson as others are learning a lesson is, man, the soft skills, the people skills, the being able to read nonverbal cues, those are the things that are going to set great leaders and businesses apart over the next generation, because we've either missed that opportunity or we have people that have done more online. We have done more away from your computer. We're not touching people. We're thinking, hey, how can we automate that? And I believe this, and I hear this from you, is there's a tremendous level of connection that you surely can't automate.
You nailed it again. You surely cannot automate it, nor can you delegate it.
No. Yeah.
COVID taught us many things. Number one, it taught us all of a sudden, I'm hearing from executives, from Beijing to South Africa to everywhere, they're writing to me and saying, I can't read people. All I can see is their face, and some of the faces of people in the office are covered. Oh, all of a sudden, body language is now important, okay? The second thing we learned is how resilient we are as humans and how quickly we can adapt. Mm-hmm. I used to maybe make 1 Skype, 2 Skype calls a month, and now we went to 80% Zoom calls overnight. But we also learned the efficacy of it, and that is that there's a lot to be shared by being able to see each other, to engage each other. That warm smile that greets us, those arching eyebrows that get excited as we get excited about a topic and so forth. That communicates a lot. Going forward, you're right also. This is an opportunity for leaders. And the opportunity is in this. How are you going to handle it when part of the workforce is somewhat hesitant about going back into the workplace? That you as a leader, as I said, one of the things that a leader does is attenuates fear. That you have to create an empathetic environment where those that are still concerned about their health are respected, and those that think everything is back to normal, they also have to be respected. But you also have to give guidance. You also have to realize that people are going to be standing further away from each other. My company's already observed this. We've done multiple studies now where when people have gone back to work, they don't realize it, but they're standing about 8 to 11 inches further than they were before. And this is just a natural phenomena, that humans are not faucets, that we will be coming back into the workplace, and we have to give, leaders have to give workers, their compatriots, they have to give them the opportunity to vent, because they're angry, they're upset, there's a lot of depression. As in my own life, we've lost people in my own neighborhood. I know of 3 losses, and this is significant, and people will need to get this out of their system as we get back to that more focused work. So leaders are going to have to provide that amplitude to be human and to adjust to the circumstances that are still with us. But what a great opportunity for leaders to really demonstrate how much they care. I have to go back probably maybe 70, 80 years to a time where leaders had this opportunity to really demonstrate this level of caring, and so I think it's a great opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I see as leadership. It's a great learning lesson, and it's going to be a divider. And to me, and I want to share this with you, and I want to get your take on it. As we've talked about this empathy, we've talked about being exceptional, we've talked about maybe, what are those barriers? This is my belief, and this has been my experience. The thing that held me back from being more empathetic was my insecurities about where did I fit, how did I fit, what value did I bring in. So to me, I believe that's the greatest barrier, and I'd love for you to think about it. If you can think about it now, you get back to me later, but think about it. To me, that's the biggest thing. If we can come to grips with our insecurity, we all have it. I have it. You have it. Everyone listening has an insecurity, and Go ahead.
No, I think that's a profound statement, and it bears examination because we all have insecurities. I remember as a young agent, I had insecurities, and what we have to surmount to be empathetic when we feel frail, because when we're insecure, we're frail. We're not, as we now say, together, and so I think it's difficult to be empathetic, and yet at the same time, how many times have I learned that I can strengthen myself by going beyond myself and taking care of others?
By displaying vulnerability, right? It's when you're vulnerable enough to embrace that insecurity, say, hey, it is what it is. I'm going to, and to me, I'd love if, this is maybe another conversation over, something in Florida where we sit down and enjoy and say, hey, what body cues? Hey, I'm fighting over insecurity, and that I recognize that and I'm like, oh, now I feel secure in this conversation, this relationship, this interaction with us. Like, I understand you have some hesitation, and maybe I have hesitation, but now all of a sudden we've opened each other up. That vulnerability means now all of a sudden we are compatriots. We're going to go forward in this. Because to me, there's probably a lot in that, and it's that taking off that armor, allowing for that insecurity to say, hey, I admit it. Yeah, it's there. I've accepted it. Now that vulnerability is going to allow us to go even farther.
You're exactly right. I was in Manchester, England, right before COVID, like 2 weeks before they shut everything down, and I've given thousands of talks, and I'm just getting ready to get on stage, and the gentleman hands me a little cup of water, and I notice my hand is shaking, and then they call me, and I'm walking out on this stage. There's 400 or 500 people there, and I just said it. I said, folks, I don't know why, but I'm nervous, and I shouldn't be. I should be, and people say, oh, you never tell the public you're nervous. Sorry, mate, but I'm nervous, and I don't know why. And after the event was over, you're only on for 15 minutes, and we had a book signing, and I had people come up to me and say, I'm asked to give speeches, and I always get nervous, and you made me happy to know that somebody experienced like you gets nervous. And I said, I get nervous all the time. and there was something about opening up, that showing the humanity of it, that I think was very rewarding. And at the same time, I think it builds us up too, and saying, I'm human, I have sentiments, and the old, and I understand it. In law enforcement, you have to have this veneer because things can happen and they can turn bad really fast. But I've never hesitated to show my emotions. I have cried at crime scenes. I have, even in court, and I just front it. And it is what it is. I've done heroic things, but do they measure as much as that openness? I don't think so. I think just being open and letting younger agents see that, hey, it's okay to cry. I think that has greater merit than anything else that I've done.
Well, I think, emotions are part of our nonverbals, right? How we display that, we can't hide that. And to me, as we come back to this, this whole display of empathy, and to me, it's a spectrum. I've talked about this on my podcast before. It's, at one end, you're hard and callous. The other end, you're a doormat. And to me, it's somewhere in the middle that's healthy. And to me, those emotions are what allow people to come together, and it is that being, because empathetic to me can't be one way. It is, if I'm trying to, connect with you and I'm Joe, ask me about you and tell me about you, and I'm learning and I'm caring and we're going through those things. If I hadn't learned about, you, it's kind of like, and you're the whole time stiff, well, this conversation wouldn't be valuable, right? It's not a one way, but it's all of a sudden, if I start to open up and I start to smile, do all those nonverbals that you've identified, as you saw with when you were interrogating people or going through, it's like the more that you cared about them, the more they just opened up and they wanted to go with you, right?
Oh, it's absolutely true. I was interviewing. Well, I write about it in the book. Where, let me just say this, because I think you hit on an important point. Being empathetic doesn't mean you're somebody's chew toy. It doesn't mean people walk all over you. Not at all. You can be empathetic and be hard as nails. And what I mean by hard as nails is that you're not going to violate the law. You're not going to violate morals, and you're certainly not going to violate ethics, because the violation of ethics is the antipathy of being empathetic. You especially in my role, where I'm sitting there in the book. I talk about this criminal, really a despicable man, because he was a pedophile, and my job is to get information, not to act tough, not to make him feel bad. The judge will do that. My job is to get information, because there's a lot more victims, and my empathy for him is not because of his crimes. My empathy for him is in that he is a human being, and I'm going to treat him with respect. And that's it. And that's it. And when you can do that, and I've done this with some of the worst people, and I've had them come back and say, I talked to you because you're the first person to treat me with respect. You're the first person in law enforcement that hasn't called me a maggot, a tramp, or this or that. And it's like, and you're telling me that that's the key? just being just being a nice person, just being respectful is all it takes. And in a way, that's exactly what it takes. That I'm not going to bend the rules. I'm certainly not going to cheat the justice system. But I will grant whatever I am entitled to grant under the auspices of being empathetic, that if a person needs water, if he needs medical treatment, if he needs to get something off their chest, that I'm going to provide that. And I think there's a misunderstanding about what empathy is, that somehow you have to put your life on hold and acquiesce to others, and that is not empathy at all.
Yeah. Well, I agree, and again, so much great value that I've learned out of your book, and can't wait to digest even more. And so, Joe, thank you so much for joining me today. I've gotten tremendous value out of it, and I truly hope to be able to call you a friend and say, hey, would love to have more of these discussions, because again, you've dug a hole here to where I'm very interested in my own experiences, but I believe from a leadership perspective, it's a great opportunity.
Absolutely. Of course, we're friends. I make friends for life. I don't make friends for 15 minutes. Just think about the things that you do every day, where you give opportunities, the way that you ask questions, the enthusiasm with which you do it, how you turn yield in our conversations. Many of these things are nonverbals, but they register. They register with your guests. They register with your audiences. And that's what sets us apart. That's when we begin to see, those are the exceptional traits. They don't cost, exceptional traits don't cost money, but they cost effort. And that's the big difference. So I congratulate you.
Well, thank you, Joe. That's a great little note to end on. I love that, and hope everyone, if you didn't catch that, rewind it back 15, 30 seconds and make sure you write that one down. Joe, thank you for your time. Thank you for your contribution and just being you and really diving into this stuff that really intrigues you, because we're all better off for it.
Thank you very much.